Okay, so today we're going to look at commercial law. Um, Now, in Italy, commercial law is written law. You don't really have much common law. You have some little bit of consuetudine. Um, but in England, it's mainly uh, common law. So it's not written law. It's kind of precedents that judges decide on, principles they decide on from previous cases. It kind of emerges from different situations. These principles. So if they want to know the law, if the lawyers want to understand the law and how it will be applied, they have to go to previous cases and look at all the different principles that were applied previously. Instead, in your law, in Italian law, commercial law is written in the civil code. It's part of the civil code, Codice Civile, and it's all written down. So it's much clearer and easier, maybe easier for a lawyer because there's one source. But first thing in the commercial law in Italy to look at is the definition of an entrepreneur. This is very important because as it's written down, it has to be decided who is an entrepreneur. What is his or her identity? Because they're not, normally they have more obligations to pay taxes or to do abide by certain laws if you're an entrepreneur. If instead you do an activity as a hobby or as a charity or just something to do, you can't be considered an entrepreneur if you're not in that definition. So we have to, first of all, identify an entrepreneur. We know an entrepreneur is really important in economics because he or she's the one that organises all the factors of production to produce. So, in Article 2082 of the Codice Civile, we find out an entrepreneur or it says, è imprenditore chi esercita professionalmente un'attività economica organizzata al fine della produzione o dello scambio di beni o servizi. Now, we've got to interpret this. The first thing is to interpret what do we mean by these words. So when it says an entrepreneur is somebody who carries it out professionally, it's talking about people that do an activity regularly and in a way maybe to build a reputation so that they can make a business. And so it's professional. It's not somebody, for example, who sees a cheap car and buys that cheap car and then sells it and makes a bit of money. Why? Because it's not very regular. It's just an opportunist, shall we say? It's not an entrepreneur, but somebody who buys many cars cheap and maybe takes them to the market and sells them for a profit. We can consider, and they do that every week for a reasonable amount of time. That's an entrepreneur. We know that's an entrepreneur because he's doing it professionally. So that's how we interpret that word. And economic activity. So that's got to be interpreted. What do we mean by economic activity? It means that the costs must be covered by the income. They don't have to make a profit. They could just cover the cost, just make a balance, but they can't be less than the costs, or there can't be an intention of being less. Yes, the objective is to make a profit or have a balance. Otherwise, if the intention was to make a loss, it wouldn't be an entrepreneur, it would be a charity, it wouldn't be a business, would it? Remember, a business creates wealth, crea riqueza. Whereas if the intention is to make a loss, you're just doing someone a favor. You're not really creating wealth. But it can be a balance. I mean, if an entrepreneur makes a loss accidentally because the market's not good, etc., they made a bad decision, then that's still the intention was to make a profit. Or if maybe they make a loss for the first 2 years just to get a big market share, get a lot of customers, and then they put their prices up. If that's the strategy, that's okay, because the intention is to make a loss sooner or later. Okay, so that's how we interpret this, an economic activity. And that's very important. It's organised to produce or exchange goods or services. So it can be production, it can be a factory. This is wealth creation, isn't it? So we bring the factors of production together, the land, capital, and labour. Or it can be the distribution of goods. An entrepreneur could be somebody who buys a lot in a big quantity and then sells in small quantities, like the grosseto buys in a big quantity, then sells to the retailer. And the retailer buys in that quantity and sells in even smaller quantities. But the service they're doing is distribution of goods. So they will expect some sort of profit. So it's organised to produce or exchange goods or services. That's an entrepreneur. Someone who produces for themselves, not an entrepreneur. So if I decide to repair my car, that might be to save money, but that's not an entrepreneur. Or if I decorate my house, my apartment, that's not an entrepreneur. The goods must be intended for the market. So that the objective is to bring them to the market and to make a profit or pareggio, a balance. Okay, so profit's not necessary, just a balance. Remember, if it's not intended to balance the minimum, if it's intended to go into the red, to make a loss, then you're turning into a charity, not a business, an entrepreneurial business. Another particular thing about the Italian system is the creator of intellectual property is not an entrepreneur. For example, someone who's an accountant maybe sets up an office with other accountants, or maybe engineers set up an office and they sell their competence to companies, to big companies. They're not entrepreneurs, they're more artisans. So they're selling a specific skill. They're not organising the factors of production or distributing goods and services. They are selling an ability. So they're selling their labour, if you like. Remember, an entrepreneur is more of an organiser. This actually did contrast a little bit with European law, which considers intellectual property as entrepreneurial as well, because it means they must abide by the rules of competition. But Italy still doesn't consider, it still considers them as just workers, really, artisans, if you like, which are freelance workers. Okay, now there are two subcategories of entrepreneur. Once we've decided who's an entrepreneur, the different entrepreneurs can have different laws disciplining them. So a commercial entrepreneur will have certain laws they must respect, like, for example, in the Statuto dell'Imprenditore Commerciali, they must register at the register office, they must put all their accounts down there and declare everything, and everything is transparent, and they can go bankrupt, etc. Whereas agricultural entrepreneurs, they don't have to, and they can't go bankrupt. So there is a difference between these two categories in terms of law, what laws are applied. Now, why are agricultural entrepreneurs privileged? So obviously they are privileged over, if they can't go bankrupt, they don't have all these obligations, and maybe they have fiscal benefits as well. They're privileged basically because, firstly, it's very important to maintain our agricultural competencies. If, for example, we did have lots of farmers going bankrupt, and then we depend on foreigners because they're much cheaper, Africa or something, to eat, maybe they could have a lot of control over us. Like Russia has control over us with gas and energy. So it's very important strategically to be able to feed your population. So all countries, or most 99% of countries on the planet, want to be able to feed their population and not rely on imports. So that's one key reason. We don't want them going bankrupt. But another reason is the risk. The risk isn't about being competitive and finding the right opportunity, what people want, etc. It's about the weather, which we can't control. With commercial entrepreneurs, we want them to be firstly competitive and be efficient and effective. And so maybe if they go bankrupt, it's because they weren't organising their factors of production well, or we want them to do the right things, produce what we want, and not just anything we don't want. Whereas the agricultural entrepreneur, we want food anyway, and the big producer of agriculture, really, the factory is Mother Nature, isn't it? And that's so unpredictable. So we do protect them a little bit over commercial entrepreneurs. They're more exposed and must be more competitive, and they've got to respect more obligations because maybe they can cheat a bit, etc. But the agricultural entrepreneurs, we've got to be careful of those. So, first of all, we've got to decide what is a commercial entrepreneur and what is an agricultural entrepreneur. Okay, so this article is the article which shows that the agricultural imprenditores don't have to register in the Registro delle Imprese. It says, Article 2195 says the following subjects have the obligation to register in the Registro delle Imprese. So these ones have the obligation. An industrial activity which produces goods or services. So that's not agricultural. Okay, it's an industrial activity which produces goods and services. an activity involved in the circulation of goods. So that's not an activity which transports by road, sea or air. So here we've got maybe ships, maybe trains, service, a train service, courier service, banking or insurance activity. Okay, so other activities which support the previous categories. So these might be services which help the other, maybe marketing services or I don't know, training, maybe English lessons, something like that. So these must register in the Registro delle Imprese, and in that list there's no agricultural imprenditori. So that's an example of how the law is codified to communicate that. Here we talk about this in the lesson. Got all the different examples in the lists, and we can go through which one is which. Okay. So we have this Statuto degli Imprenditori Commerciali, and that is binding on the commercial entrepreneur, and in there it says that the entrepreneur is subject to failure of the activity, so they can go bankrupt, and they have this obligation to register, like I said before, and also an obligation to keep written accounts, and those must be public as well. They must go in the Registro delle Imprese, and also they're subject to the norms of obligatory representation, so they need a legal representative who must be capable, have the capacity in law, so they can't be underage or they've got to have mental capacity. So a legal representative is like somebody who can sign contracts or maybe go to court to represent the company. So he'll be he or she will be arguing for the perspective of the company, defending the company in some way, maybe. For example, in the school, the legal representative is the president, and if she's subject to the norms of obligatory representation, first of all, there must be some legal representative, so we need a president, and she must have all those other requirements, be of legal age, to be able to act in law, and be of mental capacity, and not be in prison, etc. So why do these commercial entrepreneurs need to register in the Registro delle Imprese? That's a good question. The answer is, basically, commercial law exists. The whole of commercial law exists to protect creditors. Creditors can be workers who are waiting for their wages. Maybe they've been waiting for 10 months. Suppliers who are waiting to be paid. Investors that have invested into the business and maybe loans the business some money, and the tax man, all these protagonists that have a stake, or stakeholders, let's call them stakeholders in the business, need protection, because they've all got rights, and they've invested something in the business, whether it's their labour or whatever, and So they've all got rights, and that has to be protected by commercial law. So part of the protection is to write it down in the Registro delle Imprese, because if it's all public, that means the suppliers can go and they can see, the company's this much in debt, maybe we can allow them a bit of credit, and there's no surprises, or maybe the investors want to invest more or lend more money, and they can go to this registrar and see whether it is a solvent activity and it's worth expanding, their involvement into the business. So it needs to be public. So then, they can see first. The public can see what's happening in the business. Is it worth working for, etc. And also that they're not being ripped off. They can check the accounts and check the money's not coming out and just going into the directors' bank accounts, and check that everything's above board, and that maybe if you're a creditor, another creditor's not being paid before you, and you're being ignored when you've got maybe rights to be paid first, etc., etc. So it is very important when you're a reasonably sized commercial activity. The activity and all the administration must be public. So these are the obligations of a commercial activity that an agricultural activity doesn't have. So obviously there's an interest in being defined as an agricultural activity. Now, for that reason, there's an article, this article 2135, that defines an agricultural entrepreneur, because if you breed dogs, or maybe you do something, you sell food, that doesn't mean you're an agricultural entrepreneur, even though you might want to be to get the benefits. So this agricultural entrepreneur article says: imprenditore agricolo chi esercita un'attività diretta alla coltivazione del fondo. So, first of all, it's somebody who works the land for food, alla silvicoltura, so the wood, all'allevamento del bestiame e attività connesse. This is very important. Later on we'll explain, we'll interpret that. Si reputano connesse le attività dirette alla trasformazione o all'alienazione dei prodotti agricoli quando rientrano nell'esercizio normale dell'agricoltura. Now we're going to go into the interpretation of this. So we try to. It talks about raising livestock. Now, livestock, we know, is animals we use for food. So here we've got cows, and we can say, yeah, we eat beef and drink milk, or pigs, yes, hens, the eggs, or the meat. Racing horses, no. So somebody who races horses is not an agricultural entrepreneur. He's defined as a commercial entrepreneur, and he doesn't get the benefits. Or somebody who breeds dogs doesn't get that benefit. So it's raising livestock, bestiame, for food. It also says about being connected. So activities which is connected to the agricultural activity. So if you are a farmer and then you extend that, and maybe you produce wine with your your produce, with your harvest, that will also be included in that agricultural definition. Or maybe you make jam, or maybe you have a restaurant that serves that your produce. As long as it's connected to your farm and it's using that produce, you can include this in your definition of agricultural entrepreneur. So many farms, do sell wine or have these activities which, serve the public food in restaurants from their farm, because they are also able to be benefited from a different legal code. They're disciplined in a different way than a commercial entrepreneur. But if you don't have the farm, you just have the restaurant, or you just make the wine, then you're a commercial entrepreneur. You cannot be considered an agricultural entrepreneur if you just do something connected, if you just supply from a farmer. Okay, so we've learned that commercial entrepreneurs are disciplined in a different way according to different laws than agricultural entrepreneurs. They don't have to register, the agricultural entrepreneurs, they don't have to register in the Registro dell'Impresa, they don't go bankrupt, they don't have to submit their accounts, etc., etc. But it's not all only agricultural entrepreneurs that have these benefits. Also, small entrepreneurs have these benefits too. In fact, the agricultural entrepreneurs are considered small entrepreneurs, really. In these articles we're going to look at, we're going to see that they're given these exclusions to their obligations, to the obligation of a big entrepreneur. Now, why would that happen? Why would a big entrepreneur have to do more things, have more public scrutiny, have the possibility to go bankrupt, have, etc., etc. Why? Well, we've got to remember that small entrepreneurs, the small businesses, need to start, and they're not going to be so competitive. They're, these infant companies need to grow to get to be competitive. And once they get to a certain size, then they can take on more obligations. You could look at it like that. If this starts, 10,000 small businesses a year, then maybe one or two could become Fiat, or Pininfarina, or some very large company, and really contribute to the economy. So it's worth protecting these small businesses to see if some can kind of make it. There's this way of looking at it. But there's also the way of looking at it that a small entrepreneur doesn't really have the security, does he or she? The small business can be considered workers. Maybe they're not. They use their hands. They're not. They don't have lots of employees. They're doing the work, yet they haven't got the workers' rights. Remember, the Constitution talked about protecting artisans and craftsmen, and these would be considered small entrepreneurs. You've got to remember that the Constitution talks about protecting workers, protecting people who are producing from being exploited, and small businesses could be exploited. If you're a small business, maybe you're not employing many people, and the owners are doing the work. They are producing, they're not just exploiting. So we do have this, and here in these two articles we can see how they are protected. So you've got Article 2221 says gli imprenditori che esercitano un'attività commerciale esclusi gli enti pubblici e I piccoli imprenditori, so excluding them, sono soggetti in caso di insolvenza alle procedure del fallimento e del concordato preventivo, salve le disposizioni delle leggi speciali. Okay, so there's some laws for very, very big companies, very important companies, got special laws. So, you know, the big ones can go bankrupt, but not small businesses or public entities. It says excluding these ones. So that shows they're not subject to fallimento. Not being subject to fallimento doesn't mean you don't have to pay your debts. I mean, they can still take things. A business, maybe it's got a machine or a van, and that could be taken to pay a debt ordered by the judge. It just means that business can't be stopped. It's kind of got a right to work, hasn't it? It can't be stopped functioning, whereas a bigger business can be closed. The state takes over the business, takes control of the business, and that doesn't happen with the small imprenditori, the small entrepreneurs. They still got the right to work. Okay, so that's one exclusion, one exception they have. Article 2202 says non sono soggetti all'obbligo dell'iscrizione nel registro delle imprese I piccoli imprenditori. So, quite explicit, that one. They don't have to register, which means they also don't have to register their accounts, as the Statuto degli imprenditori commerciali have to. So we can see these exceptions for the small imprenditori. Now, obviously, if they've got these benefits, everyone wants to be considered a small entrepreneur. So we've got an article here, 2083, that indicates how to interpret what is a small entrepreneur. Sono piccoli imprenditori, I coltivatori diretto del fondo. Okay, like I said, the agricoltori are small entrepreneurs, they're considered. Gli artigiani, like I said again. I piccoli commercianti e coloro che esercitano un'attività professionale organizzata prevalentemente con il loro proprio e dei componenti della famiglia. Okay, so this is important. So we've got the agriculture entrepreneurs, the artigiani. So now we've got to see who are artigiani. So artigiani use their own manual work, and they don't just manage the organisation. So a small entrepreneur or an artigiano is the one that does the work. They don't just manage the work being done. So that's the first characteristic, and we can see that in an artigiano, a craftsman. Then it says prevalentemente la famiglia. So you can take on workers, but it's got to be mainly your family members. Okay, so if it's mainly the family workers, it's got to be at least 50+% your family. You can have maybe you, your wife, 3 children working in the business, but then you can only take on another 4 people, 4 workers. Otherwise, it's not mainly the family of the entrepreneur. So that is a consideration, very important consideration, and that's kind of to protect, the family unit. Italians, the constitution always wants to protect a community, and it sees as the most fundamental element, the smallest possible community is a family. It sees that as a community, and so that will be protected. If it's mainly the family members, then it can take on some workers, but that is important. Okay, so in commercial law, it has to be decided what is a company, an azienda. What is it really? Because a company might just be contracts. If I have a company but I lease the vans and I rent the building, I don't own the workers, I just hire them. They can leave. All the suppliers, they're just contracts. So what is that company that I own? It doesn't actually own anything. I don't actually have the possession of anything. So if I sell that, what am I selling? That the person I sell that company to, maybe they spend 500,000 on the company, and yet maybe the landlord of the premises decides to stop the contract and restart it with me again, and the lease company decides to lease the vans to me again, and the workers decide to leave the new owner and join and I just redo my company, and I'm 500,000 better off. So really, we have to protect. Commercial law must protect people, entrepreneurs that buy companies, by defining a company. What is it that they've bought? Here in 2555, we've got this definition. It says, l'azienda è il complesso dei beni organizzati dall'imprenditore per l'esercizio dell'impresa. So the company is the assets. So the assets might not be owned by me, but they're, what the company needs to operate, which are organised by an entrepreneur for a specific job, to produce something for the work. Okay, so when I sell something, a company, I'm selling the organisation of those assets to another imprenditore. We know an entrepreneur is somebody who organises factors of production. Remember from the economics, he organises the factors of production to produce. So I'm selling the organisation rather than the ownership of anything physical. And that's very important to understand. Also in this article, it protects the new owner by saying chi aliena l'azienda deve astenersi per periodo di 5 anni dal trasferimento dall'iniziare una nuova impresa che, per l'oggetto, l'ubicazione o altre circostanze, sia idonea a sfiare la clientela dell'azienda ceduta. So, I can't, if I sell a company, I can't start another company of similar objectives, which has the intention of getting the old market, the old, customers, and that protects the new owner. So I can't just, start renting the old premises and he gets stopped by the owner of the premises, and the old workers come back to me, etc. This is called concorrenza sleale, so it's a very serious offence, a penal offence, in which you can go to prison. So that protects any potential transfer of a business.